It was a perfect spring afternoon in the park, until two police cruisers shattered the peace. They thought I was a criminal, but I was just a law student, about to give them a lesson they'd never forget. The sun was warm on my face, one of those perfect late spring afternoons that feels like a gift. My son, Leo, just 14 months old, was giggling in his stroller, batting at a fluffy dandelion I'd just given him. Its seeds danced in the air like tiny fairies. For the first time in weeks, the knot of stress in my shoulders had finally loosened. Being a single mom while juggling online law classes is a special kind of chaotic, and this quiet moment in the park was my sanctuary. I had my textbook open on my lap, a highlighted chapter on civil rights and police misconduct, ironically enough. I was on the phone with my study partner, Maria, walking her through a case study we had to present. "No, you're missing the point," I said, shifting Leo's sun hat. "The prosecution's whole argument hinges on probable cause, but the initial stop was completely pretextual. They had no basis. You have to attack the root. Take him down at the source." I was passionate, waving my free hand as I spoke. Leo gurgled, thinking it was a game. I didn't notice the woman on the bench across the path, the one with the tight blonde perm and the disapproving scowl. I didn't notice her pull out her own phone, her thumb tapping furiously across the screen. To me, she was just part of the scenery, a background character in my moment of peace. That peace shattered about 10 minutes later. It started with the crunch of tires on the gravel path where cars weren't supposed to be. Two police cruisers, lights flashing but sirens off, boxed in the little playground area. My heart did a nervous little flutter. It's the reaction, I think, that a lot of people who look like me have. A deep, primal unease that tightens your chest long before you know what's happening. Two officers got out of the first car. One was older, with a weathered face and a look of weary impatience. The other was younger, with a military-style haircut and a jaw that looked like it was permanently clenched. He was the one who strode towards me. "Ma'am, I need you to stand up and place your hands where I can see them," he said. His voice wasn't asking. It was a flat, hard command. I blinked, completely bewildered. "I'm sorry, officer. Is there a problem?" I glanced around. A few other parents were starting to stare, gathering their own children and backing away. The woman with the perm was standing near the officers, pointing a trembling finger right at me. "She was talking about a target," the woman screeched, her voice shrill. "Said she was going to take him down. She was planning something, I know it." My jaw dropped. I looked at the officer, a disbelieving laugh threatening to bubble up. "Officer, that is a complete misunderstanding. I'm a law student. I was on the phone with my study partner discussing a case." I gestured to my textbook, the bright yellow highlighter still sitting on the open page. "Civil procedure. You can call her if you want." The younger officer, whose name tag read Miller, completely ignored me. His eyes were cold, scanning me. Then Leo in his stroller, as if my baby was somehow part of a criminal conspiracy. "We received a report of a credible threat. I need you to comply. Stand up. Hands visible." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding he was trying to clear up. This was an accusation. "I'm not going to do anything until you tell me what I'm being accused of," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I knew my rights, or at least, I thought I did. That's when the older Officer Davis went to the back of his cruiser. He opened the door, and the sound that erupted tore through the peaceful afternoon air. It was a deep, vicious barking. A German shepherd, massive and bristling, lunged out of the car, held back only by a thick leather leash. Its teeth were bared, saliva flecked its muzzle. My heart didn't just flutter anymore, it hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Leo, who had been watching with wide, curious eyes, let out a terrified wail. His little body stiffened, his hands reaching for me. "You see what you're doing?" Miller snapped, his hand resting on his sidearm. "You're agitating the K9. You're upsetting your own child. This can all stop if you just cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" I cried out, my voice cracking. "I was sitting here with my baby. The dog is what's scaring him. Please, just put the dog away." But they didn't. Officer Davis took a few steps closer, the dog straining against the leash, its barks echoing across the now empty park. It lunged, and a primal fear, colder and sharper than anything I'd ever felt, shot through me. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They were using that animal, that weapon, against me and my baby. Leo's screams were piercing now, raw shrieks of pure terror. "That's enough," Miller suddenly yelled, not at his partner, but at me. "We know you're involved with Marcus Thorne. We know about the Bayside heist. Just tell us where he is." And just like that, the world screeched to a halt. The barking, Leo's crying, the pounding in my own ears, it all faded into a dull roar. Marcus Thorne, the Bayside jewelry heist. It had been the lead story on the news all morning. A violent smash and grab. The police were looking for a 6-foot-tall man with a distinctive neck tattoo. A man. They were looking for a man. They weren't here because of my phone call. The woman with the perm was just a convenient excuse. This was a mistaken identity of an entirely different and far more dangerous magnitude. They had profiled me, seen a black woman alone, and jumped to an insane conclusion. And in their haste, in their aggression, they had just told me everything I needed to know. The fear that had been paralyzing me moments before evaporated, replaced by a sudden chilling clarity. It felt like ice water flooding my veins. I looked at Miller, at his clenched jaw and his cold eyes. I looked at the body camera blinking on his chest, a silent, impartial witness. I gently rocked the stroller, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." Then I lifted my head and met Officer Miller's gaze. My own voice, when it came out, was unrecognizable. It was steady, devoid of any tremor, and as cold as a judge's gavel. "Officer," I said, my words cutting cleanly through the noise, "you have exactly one chance to call off your dog, get your supervisor down here, and pray, and I mean pray, that I'm feeling forgiving today." Officer Miller's face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and fury. For a second, I thought he might actually laugh. "You're in no position to be making demands, lady. You're obstructing an investigation. Now, for the last time, get up and put your hands on your head." He took a half-step forward, his posture aggressive, his voice dropping to a low growl. The German shepherd mirrored his handler's energy, its barking frenzy escalating into a guttural roar, lunging so hard against the leash that Officer Davis had to brace himself. Leo's terrified screams were like daggers in my ears. Every instinct was screaming at me to scoop him up and run, but I knew that was the worst possible thing I could do. I was trapped, so I focused. I compartmentalized the fear, pushing it into a box and slamming the lid shut. My son's cries became a metronome, counting down the seconds of their illegal detention. The dog's barks were a soundtrack to their gross misconduct. I forced my breathing to even out, my mind racing through case law. Terry v. Ohio, Graham v. Connor. The Fourth Amendment. This wasn't a classroom exercise anymore. This was my final exam, and my life and my son's safety was the grade. "Your investigation," I replied, my voice still unnervingly calm. "Let's review the facts, shall we? You approached me, a woman sitting alone with her infant child in a public park. You failed to provide reasonable suspicion for this stop. You then escalated the situation by deploying a K9 unit, a clear use of excessive force against a non-resisting civilian and a minor. You accused me, without a shred of evidence, of being an accomplice to a male suspect, Marcus Thorne. Your name is Officer Miller, badge number 724. Your partner is Officer Davis, badge number 581. Your body cameras, which I can see are active, have recorded every second of this. So no, officer, I am not obstructing your investigation. I am your investigation, and every word you say from this point forward will be used to end your career." Silence. A stunned, heavy silence broken only by Leo's sobbing. Miller's jaw was working, but no sound came out. He looked at Davis, who had a flicker of deep uncertainty in his eyes. The older cop gave the K9's leash a sharp tug, pulling the dog back a step. He knew I was right. He knew they had crossed a line so bright it was burning. It was Miller who was too proud, too angry to admit it. Finally Davis spoke, his voice gravelly. "Miller, call the sergeant, now." It took another 7 minutes for the supervisor's car to arrive. 7 minutes of me whispering reassurances to Leo, trying to shield his view of the snarling dog, while Miller paced back and forth, muttering into his shoulder radio, shooting me looks of pure venom. When Sergeant Reynolds finally arrived, he looked the part of a seasoned professional. He was calm, his expression neutral, and he assessed the scene with a quick, practiced eye. He sent Davis and the K9 back to their vehicle immediately, a small mercy for which I was profoundly grateful. The dog's barking faded, and Leo's sobs began to subside into shuddering hiccups. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Reynolds," he said, approaching me slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "I understand there's been a situation. Can you tell me what happened here?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of reason. "Sergeant," I began, my voice clear and precise, "your officers unlawfully detained me and my infant son. They used a K9 to intimidate us and accused me of being an accomplice in the Bayside heist. Their entire basis for the stop was a misinterpretation of a phone call I was having about a law school case study." I pointed to my textbook. "My name is Alani Freeman. I am not a threat. I have no connection to any Marcus Thorne. This has been a terrifying and completely unjustified ordeal." Reynolds listened, nodding patiently. He had a disarming way about him, making me feel like he was truly hearing me. He apologized for my son's distress. He assured me he would get to the bottom of it. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel a sliver of relief. This man would fix this. He would see the egregious error his officers had made. He turned to Miller. "What's the complainant's name? The one who made the 911 call?" "Karen Pritchard," Miller grumbled, looking at the ground. "Lives over on Elm." Reynolds nodded again, then turned back to me. His expression had shifted. The look of concern was gone, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Miss Freeman, I do apologize for the confusion. However, my officers were responding to a call about a potential threat, and they have to take all such calls seriously. And now that I'm here—" He took a step closer, sniffing the air theatrically. "I can't help but notice a distinct smell of marijuana coming from your belongings." The world tilted on its axis. The relief I'd felt curdled into pure, cold dread. It was a lie. A complete and utter fabrication. I've never touched the stuff in my life. It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book. A pretext. A way to salvage their illegal stop by inventing a new crime. "You have got to be kidding me," I whispered, the shock rendering me momentarily speechless. "I'm afraid not," Reynolds said, his voice losing all its previous warmth. "I'm going to need to search your stroller and your bag now. It's for my officer's safety and your own." He didn't wait for my consent. He reached out, his hand moving towards the handle of Leo's stroller, towards my baby, towards my entire world. It was a violation so profound it stole my breath. But as his fingers brushed against the fabric of the diaper bag, hanging from the handle, his eyes fell on my open laptop, still sitting in the stroller's storage basket where I'd quickly stashed it when they arrived. The screen was on, showing the faces of a dozen other students in a grid pattern. One of them, Maria, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. And right above her face, in the top left corner of the screen, were two small blinking icons. One was a microphone, indicating I was muted. The other was a bright red dot with the word "recording" printed right beside it. My laptop was open because I had been presenting my case study, and the webcam had been streaming live to my entire civil rights study group for the last 15 minutes. Sergeant Reynolds froze. His hand, which had been inches from my diaper bag, hovered in midair as if he'd been petrified. His eyes, wide and suddenly glassy, were glued to the laptop screen. He wasn't just looking at the blinking red recording icon. He was looking at the 12 distinct faces of my study group, their expressions a gallery of horror and disbelief, all staring back at him from the digital classroom. 12 witnesses. 12 future lawyers. The air, which had been thick with tension, suddenly felt thin, electric. The faint sound of city traffic seemed to vanish, and all I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart. Miller, who had been sulking a few feet away, noticed the shift in his supervisor's demeanor. "Sarge? What is it?" He stepped closer, craning his neck to see the screen. His jaw, which had been set in a hard line of defiance, went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. He looked like a man who had just watched his own car careen off a cliff in slow motion. I didn't say a word. I just watched them. I watched the gears turning behind Reynolds's eyes as he processed the magnitude of his blunder. The fabricated smell of marijuana. The attempted illegal search, it was all there. A permanent, undeniable record, broadcast live and saved to a cloud server he could never touch. He had walked himself, and his officers, directly into a perfectly documented career-ending trap. Slowly, deliberately, Sergeant Reynolds pulled his hand back. He straightened up, his movement stiff, robotic. He cleared his throat, but the sound was raspy, dry. "Miss Freeman," he began, his voice strained, the disarming professional persona completely shattered. "It appears there has been a significant misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, the calm I had clung to for so long finally cracking, allowing a wave of cold fury to rush in. "You call this a misunderstanding? Your officers threatened my baby with a dog. You tried to frame me for drug possession to cover up their illegal stop. I'd call that a felony, Sergeant. Conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Title 18, Section 241. Carries a hefty prison sentence, as I recall." I reached down and calmly unmuted my microphone on the laptop. A cacophony of voices erupted from the small speakers. "Alani, are you okay? We have it all recorded. We're calling the ACLU right now. Get their badge numbers again, my professor, Mr. Davies, a brilliant bulldog of a man who'd spent 20 years as a civil rights attorney before turning to teaching. His voice boomed through the tiny speakers, clear and authoritative. "Miss Freeman, do not say another word to those officers. We have everything. The city attorney's office number is already being dialed." Reynolds flinched as if he'd been struck. He shot a venomous look at Miller, a silent communication of blame and panic that was almost satisfying to watch. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. 5 minutes ago, I was a suspect, a lady to be commanded. Now I was a plaintiff, a problem that could cost them their careers, their pensions, and quite possibly their freedom. "Now listen," Reynolds said, turning back to me, his hands held up in a placating gesture. He was trying to de-escalate, to put the genie back in the bottle, but it was far too late. "There's no need to get outside counsel involved. This is an internal matter. We can handle this right here. Officer Miller and Officer Davis clearly acted inappropriately. They will be disciplined, I assure you." "Disciplined?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You think this ends with a slap on the wrist and a note in their file? You pointed a weapon at my child and then tried to plant evidence on me when you realized you were caught. This isn't an internal matter anymore, Sergeant. This is a federal case." I saw the flicker of his last resort in his eyes before he even acted. Desperation. He took a half step towards the stroller, towards my laptop. It was a stupid, reflexive move, the instinct of a man trying to destroy the evidence against him. He wasn't thinking, he was just reacting. But he never got there. Before his foot even landed, another vehicle screeched to a halt on the gravel path. It wasn't a police cruiser. It was a sleek, black sedan, the kind that whispers money and influence. The door flew open and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, an immaculate grey pantsuit, and an aura of authority so potent it seemed to bend the air around her. I recognized her instantly from a dozen news articles and guest lectures. It was Eleanor Vance, the city's district attorney. And sitting in the passenger seat, looking pale but resolute, was my study partner, Maria. She must have called her. Maria's uncle was a city councilman, and Vance was a family friend. She hadn't just called the ACLU, she had called in the cavalry. Eleanor Vance's eyes swept the scene, the two disgraced officers, the shell-shocked sergeant, me standing by the stroller, and the still-recording laptop. Her gaze was like a physical force. It landed on Sergeant Reynolds, and he visibly shrank. "Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute power. "You, Miller, and Davis are to hand over your badges and firearms. Now, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation, conducted by my office." She then looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. "Miss Freeman, my name is Eleanor Vance. I am so sorry for what you've had to endure." She paused, her eyes drifting from me to Leo, who was now quietly sniffling in his seat. Her gaze hardened again as she looked back at the officers. "But I can promise you one thing. It's over." It felt like the end. It felt like justice had arrived. But as two more detectives from the DA's office arrived and began the formal process of disarming the officers, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Officer Miller, while handing over his service weapon, looked not at the detective, not at the DA, but directly at me. And with a chilling, almost imperceptible movement, he drew a single finger across his own throat. The threat was so fleeting, so subtle, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it. But the look in Miller's eyes, a toxic brew of pure, undiluted hatred and cornered animal desperation, was unmistakable. It was a promise that this wasn't over, not for him. District Attorney Vance saw it too. Her eyes narrowed, and she made a sharp, discreet gesture to one of her detectives, who nodded and moved to position himself more directly between Miller and me. The silent exchange confirmed my fear. This man wasn't just a bad cop. He was a dangerous one. The next few hours were a blur of formal statements, evidence collection, and endless sincere apologies from every official who arrived on the scene. The original 911 caller, Karen Pritchard, was brought in for questioning and quickly crumbled, admitting she'd only called because she'd overheard words like target and take him down, and had made a prejudiced assumption based on my race. My laptop with its damning video file was carefully logged as evidence. My professor and my entire study group had already organized, creating a support network that felt like a shield. They found a pro bono civil rights attorney for me, a legend in the field, who assured me we had an open and shut case against the city. But through it all, the image of Miller's gesture was burned into my mind. A civil suit, a conviction, even prison time. Those were long-term consequences. A man like Miller, stripped of his badge and his power, was a man with nothing left to lose, and he knew where I lived. It was on my driver's license, which they'd demanded before the DA arrived. The thought made my stomach churn with a fear far more personal and sickening than what I'd felt in the park. A week later, the initial investigation was complete. Davis, the older officer, had flipped almost immediately. He gave a full confession, detailing how Miller had a history of aggressive behavior and had essentially bullied him into deploying the K9. He admitted that Reynolds had concocted the marijuana story on the spot in a panic. The body cam footage, synced with my laptop recording, was irrefutable. All three were fired and criminally charged. The city, facing an avalanche of negative press and an unwinnable lawsuit, offered a massive settlement. It was enough money to ensure that Leo and I would be secure for the rest of our lives. It was justice, on paper, but it didn't feel like a victory. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of my apartment building, every car that slowed on the street outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder. The settlement money felt tainted, like blood money I'd taken in exchange for my peace of mind. The call came 2 weeks after the incident. It was DA Vance asking me to come to her office. When I arrived, a grim-faced detective led me not to her main office, but to a small, private conference room. Vance was there, along with my attorney. Spread across the table were a series of evidence bags and file folders. "Alani," Vance began, her voice gentle. "When we processed Officer Miller's personal effects, we found some things that concerned us. His personal vehicle was searched under a separate warrant. We found a notebook." She slid a file across the table. Inside were photocopies. It was a list of names. My name was at the top, circled in red. Beside it was my address, my license plate number, and Leo's name. My breath hitched. Below my name were others, all black or Hispanic, all people who had filed complaints against Miller in the past. Miller wasn't just a bad cop, Vance continued, her voice turning to steel. He was the leader of a small, unsanctioned group of officers within the department. They called themselves the Praetorians. They targeted minorities, falsified reports, and maintained lists of anyone who challenged their authority. The Marcus Thorne accusation wasn't random. They'd been trying to pin a series of local robberies on a black man, any black man, to close the cases. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was worse than I ever could have imagined. This wasn't just 3 bad apples. It was a rot, a sickness deep inside the department. The throat-slitting gesture he made, Vance said, meeting my eyes, wasn't just an empty threat. It was a signal. We believe he was signaling to other members of his group who might have been monitoring the situation. He was marking you. A wave of nausea washed over me. I finally understood. The fear wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. "So what happens now?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. This is when Eleanor Vance smiled for the first time. It was a cold, sharp predator smile. "What happens now is that we use their own playbook against them." Miller thought he was smart, but a man with that much hate is never as smart as he thinks. His notebook wasn't just a list. It was a ledger. It detailed everything. Officer Davis's full confession gave us the leverage we needed. He identified every member of the Praetorians in exchange for a plea deal. We've been conducting a silent internal affairs sting operation for the past week. And this morning, she paused for dramatic effect, we arrested 12 more officers, including a lieutenant. We've dismantled the entire organization. Miller's threat didn't just endanger you, Miss Freeman. It ended him and his entire corrupt little club. The relief that washed over me was so total, so absolute, that it felt like a physical weight had been lifted from my chest. I could breathe again. The shadows I'd been seeing in every corner finally receded. A few years have passed since that day. I finished law school, graduating at the top of my class. The city settlement allowed me to open a small, non-profit legal aid clinic, specializing in civil rights cases and police misconduct. I represent people who don't have a voice, people who find themselves in the same terrifying position I was in. I use my knowledge, my passion, and my story to fight for them. Leo is a happy, rambunctious preschooler who only knows the park as a place for swings and laughter. Sometimes when I watch him play, I remember that day. I remember the fear. But then I remember the moment the tables turned. I remember that knowledge is power, that a camera can be a weapon, and that even when you feel most helpless, the fight is never truly over. They came for me and my son with dogs and lies, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know they were picking a fight with a woman who knew the law better than they did and who would use it to take them down. Not at the source, but at the root.